Government drama llama ding dong and the state of emergency. In case this app goes dark, may as well end on a high note, right? In my previous video, I talked about the dark age of democracy for India, where there was a lot of not great things going on during the state of emergency that was declared by Indira Gandhi in 1975 to 1977. One of the things that happened during this state of emergency is that more than 6 million men in India were coerced into sterilization, which is a nice way of putting it. Before, where sterilization was more of a quote-unquote choice, once the state of emergency was implemented, this then became a mandate, and you can feel free to pause and read the about here. Indira Gandhi's son, Sanjay, was one of her advisors, and I'm sure there's no conflict of interest there. He was heavily involved in the government, and there was questions about how much control he had over his mom and the information that went out to the public, and he was one of the people that helped sort of create this police state. The forced sterilization just happens to be one of the things that he is most known for. However, this kind of started before that. And of course, the US had their influence in this as well. The international push was so extreme that in 1965, President Lyndon Johnson refused to provide food aid to India, at the time still threatened by famine, until it agreed to incentivize sterilization. Social scientists, mostly Western, said that they needed focus on the men because they thought they were the economic decision makers. However, social scientists were either ignorant at best or willfully ignorant at worst of evidence that Indian men were in fact also economic decision makers. But because men were already dominant within the system, they argued it would behoove the government to capitalize on the male structures of power instead of thinking about equalizing it. This family planning thing started in 1951 prior to the state of emergency, and it should be seen in the wider context of the campaign to control the world population. However, they did kind of focus on certain countries more than others. India's family planning program received the biggest chunk of international aid. The World Bank gave the Indian government a loan of US $66 million between 1972 and 1980 for sterilization. They also promoted IUDs along with sterilizations, and this was seen as a response to the pressure from organizations like the World Bank, International Planned Parenthood Federation, United Nations Fund for Population Activities, and USAID. Instead of helping people with family planning, such programs forced the contraceptive methods on the reluctant populace for cash incentives. Basically, they were really pushing this on poor people. It is crucial to note that mass sterilization was not introduced during the emergency, but was used as a method of contraception for a long time before this event. Similarly, various initiatives that would be part of the policy, such as vasectomy camps, positive and negative incentives, and compulsory sterilization, were also practiced and perfected in different states before the emergency. What made mass sterilization during the emergency unique was the aggressiveness with which it was enforced. Some of the goals were to focus on rural areas and engagement in a door-to-door campaign, encouraging families to only have 2 kids per family and then try to space those over 2 years. They used media to create awareness and provided families with monetary incentives to adopt these measures. Even though the procedure for men to be sterilized is less invasive than women, there is a lot of misconceptions that they had to work around and a lot of cultural issues. Feel free to pause and read what those are. Going back to Sanjay, though, most sources do hold him responsible for this compulsory sterilization program. Feel free to pause and read the whole quote, but I want to point out this last sentence here. Indira and Sanjay, the self-styled socialists, inflicting on Indians the humiliation of forced sterilization in order to appease Western loan sharks, the irony was lost on them. Socialism, like much else, had been reduced to a slogan. TLDR, Sanjay basically had no issue just eliminating slums, and if people got hurt or unalived in the process, oh well. As mentioned before, this was done by force. States deducted salaries, blocked irrigation water from villages, threatened staff with dismissal to enforce mass sterilization across India. Those who tried to evade the officials during the day were hounded by midnight knocks on their doors. And of course, Sanjay had a lot of people in the government willing to help him implement this. They would be lured with promises of land, money, or other benefits, while public officials, including police, district authorities, and health workers, were threatened with job losses or salary cuts if they failed to meet their quotas, because they were supposed to get so many people sterilized a day. Even if you were part of the people that were supposed to get all this done, you weren't spared. Some regions wouldn't let you have a government job if you had more than 3 kids and weren't sterilized. They would cut off water, they would reduce your salary. Feel free to pause and read the numbers, but it's in the millions. Obviously, if they're working at this speed, there's probably a good chance that things aren't sterilized, things aren't clean, so there's a good chance of getting infection. not to mention the myriad of other things that can go wrong. Of course, poor and rural areas were hit hardest, no surprise there. The real victims of forcible sterilization and arbitrary demolition were the Dalits and Muslims at the bottom of the social heap, most vulnerable to the depredations of the state. Oh, also, the majority of this was done within about 6 months. Even though this particular period of history focused on men, today women bear almost the entire sterilization burden, 93% of it, according to most recent government statistics. India's sterilization campaigns for both men and women have been part of an international campaign intended to control the nation's population. Long after Indian independence, these measures were and continue to be rooted in imperialist ideas and in long-held Western attitudes about Indian manhood and womanhood. Nearly half a century after the aggressive campaigns of the 1970s, women are still unaliving in sterilization camps, undergoing procedures that they understand to be the only option without fully knowing the risks or the alternatives. Even before the state of emergency declared, to say that people were motivated is a bit of a misnomer. The term motivation was applied to a variety of incentives and disincentives intended to convince citizens to get sterilized or bring others to do so, from offering plots of land in return for sterilization to threatening fair fines or the loss of a government job for those who refuse the procedure. While both men and women could be motivated, the medical system was equipped to do many more vasectomies than tubectomies, though neither procedure was performed in the safest conditions. Of course, if you're wealthy, you could buy your way out because, of course, you could. Records show that wealthier Indians were able to buy their way out of the system. After spending time with upper-class Indians, a Washington Post reporter found that while some approved of the aggressive family planning policy, none of them had to experience it themselves. Feel free to pause and read this part of the article, but basically several people unalived through botched procedures. Some particularly aggressive government officials were also unalived by protesting. After the emergency, the Indian government decided to focus on women's sterilization again instead of men, at least in the short run. How did the Indian people feel about these apologies from Sanjay? Well, there was an attempt on his life in March 1977. But the Grim Reaper comes for us all, also karma, and he was unalived in an airplane accident in 1980. I have no idea how far this current administration will go, considering some of the bad decisions they've made, but I just thought I'd share some history for, no reason.